Here. Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. It's great to be with all of you for the next hour to an hour and a half. Thanks for joining. As always, it's a real honor to get to chat with all of you and talk about honeybees and what's going on in the industry, what's going on across the country, how we should be caring for our bees this time of year. I just really am always appreciative and honored that all of you watch this video, and I'm always so humbled and excited when people come up to me at conferences and events and say, "Hey, we watch your videos," and they're so helpful. And I'm always taken aback a little bit and go, "Oh yeah, I guess people do actually watch this." So thank you. I appreciate your time and attention. Tonight we're going to be doing something a little different, and we're going to start the evening. Whoops, hello. We're going to start the evening with Q&A. Um, as most of you have seen, really, hopefully you watched our webinar last month, and I shared, the collapse of the honeybees that's going on. I shared a lot of my personal stories, what I'm seeing out in the industry right now. And I have a lot of updates, learned a lot in the last month. And we've been inundated with questions as the bee supply on, hey, what is the latest? Could it be this? Could it be that? And so we wanted to take about 30 minutes for however long it may be less, and just do some Q&A. So if you have questions about the collapse, um, what we're seeing, things you're curious about, put them in the Q&A box. And I'm going to answer those up front, and then we'll dive into our normal program. If you've got questions that don't relate to the collapse, I can answer those too. But I want to take a minute and just answer questions that you may have. I'm going to start. I'm going to start just giving you guys an update on the collapse and what we're seeing in the industry, some early indicators of what could be causing it, some final data that has come out since our last webinar. So I'll just kind of give you the breaking news, and then as you guys have questions, put them in the Q&A box, and I'd be more than happy to answer those. So if you're new to the concept, if you didn't see our last webinar or you haven't read any of the news articles, etc., beekeepers started noticing about the second week of January as bees were entering the state of California to pollinate almonds that there were a lot of dead bees that were not normal, a lot of dead beehives and in quantities that were not normal. Most beekeepers, may lose 10 to 15% in the winter months. And a lot of beekeepers were seeing 50, 60, 80, 90, 100% losses as they were checking their bees to get them ready for almond pollination, which is the first major pollination event of the season. It's kind of on the tail end of winter. So it's really the first time that, as an industry, we're collectively looking at our honeybees. And and so, as beekeepers were looking at their honeybees, getting them ready for pollination, they just noticed tremendous losses that were not normal in quantity at all. And then a lot of their bees were weaker. The bees were not as strong as they had been in previous years. So something really happened. And it really has nothing to do with California. It just so happens that the first pollination event in the US is in California. So these collapses are happening nationwide, and beekeepers were seeing it in Florida as they were getting their bees ready, and in the Carolinas and in Texas. And um, so a lot of California got a lot of the focal point, but it really, the collapse isn't tied to California. So we were seeing that, as one of our businesses is we broker a lot of bees in California. So we receive tens of thousands of beehives throughout the country that are sent to us in California. And we were noticing as we were getting all these truckloads of bees in, like, wow, these are not healthy bees. There's something's very wrong here. A lot of hives are dead. A lot of hives aren't strong. And yet there was no apparent reason. We would check for varroa Varroa levels were not high, had plenty of food, no apparent issues, and yet they were often dead or really weak. So that's the history. Let me catch you up on what's been going on in the month to 6 weeks since this started happening. So, a lot of tests have been done. So, a lot of the beehives that were struggling have been tested. Those test results are close to being released. Um, Everything that can be tested is being tested. So, viruses, varroa, pesticides, environmental issues, everything that can be tested for is being tested for. And those results will trickle out over the next couple of months. So, I've been really involved with the USDA, helping to try to collect samples, and then figure out what's going on here. So, um, there's a lot of pesticide sampling being done too to see, hey, is there a pesticide that's causing some of this? One of the curious things that we've noticed is that this does seem to be pretty nationwide. That is an indicator that um, it's probably, in my opinion, and this is a growing opinion, is that it's a combination of several factors. Because to say, well, it's one pesticide that caused all this. Well, that pesticide would have had to have been used nationwide, you know, all of a sudden in 1 year, affecting all these hives. And you had some beekeepers 10 miles apart that were unaffected. Um, and you had some in regions where pesticides weren't used that were affected. So that doesn't quite jive. And lots of theories are being studied. Some of the theories have been, uh, cloud seeding, geothermal issues, et cetera. But that only happens in specific states, and we've seen collapses in states where that doesn't occur. So my best guess right now, and this is a guess, I think it's fairly likely that there is a virus or two that we were not aware of that is nationwide. I think that's very possible. I think it's very possible that some of the mite treatments that beekeepers use, it has not been effective, that the varroa mites are building a resistance to it. I think that's possible. I think there were regions that got especially hard hit with weather this year. The Southeast got really cold at an unusual time period. So that could be part of it. And so my guess is that it's going to kind of be this web of issues that cause this collapse. A lot of the surveys that we were waiting on have been completed. Probably a lot of you have seen those. It's about over a $600 million loss to the beekeeping industry. About 1.1 million hives lost. Um, and about a 60% loss rate for commercial beekeepers, just summer, fall, and winter. If we look at the full year, it's about 80%. And that's really concerning. That's a lot of losses. But I want to share the good news. So I think that as an industry, that this type of event really pulls us together and helps us take better care of our bees. And it helps us to create an environment that is better for honeybees. And I think that's what's happening. I think that a lot of us are working with the EPA, a lot of us are working with the USDA, the FSA, all different government agencies. I've talked to more senators and congressmen in the past 2 weeks than the past 2 years. And they're all concerned and they all want to help. The USDA is eager to help. Independent researchers are eager to help. The industry is eager to work together. And so really what we saw the last time this big collapse happened, 20 years ago almost, is the aftermath was an industry that pulled together. We saw interest in bees and beekeeping skyrocket to levels we had never seen before. We saw honey consumption grow as people, paid attention to honeybees and said, "Oh yeah, honey's pretty cool, right? Let's get some honey." So out of that collapse really came the golden years of beekeeping. And so I'm optimistic that, yes, we have some real hurdles to overcome here, but this is not a death sentence to the beekeeping industry. This is an opportunity to pull people together and create a better environment, not just for honeybees, but also all of pollinators who are suffering right now. So sometimes it takes a big, scary event, to get people's attention and to make changes for the better. And I think that's what's happening here. So hopefully next month I'll have a lot of specific details. I will say that hopefully in the next couple of days I will be publishing in coordination with the American Beekeeping Federation and American Honey Producers Association 3 action items that we need beekeepers to take to help with this issue. So watch for that. If once those are completed, it'll go out through email. I'll put it on my Facebook page if you want to find me. Uh, and on things that we need you to do to help with this. So they'll be very simple, easy things. One of them's probably going to be, hey, please send this letter to your local, state, and national representative. Please send this other letter to local media outlets, and then buy American honey. So there's going to be some really clean, easy action items that we'll ask you guys to disperse to all of your friends and family to help with this issue. Um, Last thing I'll note is that this issue is getting good publicity, finally. It's tough to break through the media news cycle right now. There's kind of a lot going on in our country at the moment, as I'm sure you've all noticed. But there's a steady trickle. I mean, I've been interviewed almost every day for the past couple of weeks, and a lot of other people have been too. The news is getting out about what's going on with the honeybees, and that's really good because the people that we need to make changes need to understand that this is an issue, and the more the news gets out, the better. So, okay, so lots of questions here. Let me jump over to them. Kimberly, you said you heard that many of the losses occurred in commercial operations that had their bees stored inside sheds over the winter. So thanks for bringing that up because I want to touch on a couple things. So the surveys that were taken, they found that hobby beekeepers lost, I'm going to get this number wrong. I think hobby beekeepers lost 40 something percent of their bees in the winter months overall, which is still high. Sideliners lost like 50 something percent, and commercial beekeepers lost 60 something percent. That is a complete opposite of what we've always seen. So historically, hobby beekeepers always lose the most, then sideline beekeepers, and then commercial beekeepers have always lost the least because we're supposed to be more experienced and we're supposed to be doing this full time. And that was completely inverted. So kudos to you guys as hobby beekeepers for beating the sideliners and commercial guys. But it's also troubling because it shows something's going on, even though commercial beekeepers spend all of their time and money just focused on taking care of their bees, and it's what sustains us and our families. Um, we still couldn't stop the losses. So that is concerning. But small scale beekeepers are doing pretty good. As far as your question, so yeah, I would say overall it's slightly the opposite. The bees overwintered indoors actually performed better, and we saw that in our own operation too. So bees stored indoors did overall statistically better than those overwintered outdoors. It wasn't by a huge margin, I think 10 to 12%. So it was better, but not tremendously. All indicators point to whatever happened to the bees happened last summer and fall, and we just started seeing the results in the late winter. So we don't think that this has anything to do with winter conditions. Um, they were exposed, the bees were exposed to something or got a virus or in the fall, and that's what has affected them today. Craig, has the collapse been region specific? Is it bee breed specific? Really good question. So, no, I mean, the data is showing that it is not region specific. It is nationwide. Is really no part of the nation that wasn't affected. And then, no, it doesn't seem to be limited to any breed of bee. So, every breed of bee and every region has been affected. Interestingly, early reports can't confirm this, but early reports are indicating that Canada is looking at a pretty massive loss. potentially worse than what we've even seen in the US. So that's an interesting data point too that we're all looking at. It's a little early because a lot, it's still kind of cold in Canada, and a lot of the beekeepers in Canada have not checked their bees yet, and it will still be a month or two before some of them do. But those in the parts of the country that can check their bees, and they're checking it, it sadly looks really bad. So again, knock on wood, that's limited occurrence and they'll come out fine. But it looks like our neighbors to the north are seeing the same thing we are. Let's see, Todd, is there a difference in what you're seeing in hives that have collapsed versus a lack of resources? You lost a hive during the last freeze with a huge pile outside the opening and smaller groups of dead bees inside. So, no, so I would say of the thousands and thousands of beehives I looked at of other people's over the past, couple of weeks, um, most of them had plenty of resources. They had plenty of food. Now, we typically did not see many dead bees. So we were not finding hives that were just full of dead bees. So the bees were able to fly out of the hive and died outside the hive. Now, bees naturally try to die outside of the hive. So if a bee is sick or if a bee knows it's going to die, they kind of, to help protect the hive, they fly out and die outside the hive. If you see if there's if a hive freezes to death, then yes, all the bees are inside the hive frozen and dead. If a hive has a severe pesticide spray, you'll see a ton of dead bees. Um, but in this case, the vast majority of operations I looked at, there were not dead bees present, and they had plenty of resources as well. Joseph, do I think there's going to be a shortage of bees for almonds next year? Are you doing splits yet in Texas? What do you think the price will be for bees and almonds next year? What do you think will happen if they have self-fertile almond trees? Do you think that could crash the beekeeping market in the US? Good set of questions. So I'll take them one at a time. Do I think there'll be a shortage of bees for almonds next year? Well, we saw a shortage this year for sure. So this collapse did create a shortage. I would say whether or not there'll be a shortage next year will depend on obviously how quickly beekeepers are able to rebuild. I'll tell you that a lot of commercial beekeepers, not all, not even the majority, but a significant minority of commercial beekeeping operations don't have the money to rebuild. When you lose 80% of your business, um, or 90%, most people don't have that kind of cash laying around just to go buy bees and rebuild. So there is a government relief program that's designed to help beekeepers in case of an emergency to rebuild lost hives. It covers about one-fourth of the cost of rebuilding when you've had an emergency catastrophic collapse. Unfortunately, that program is paused right now because of the everything going on in Washington. A lot of those relief programs have been halted. Beekeepers have a very short window where they can build bees because, we all know bees grow and build in the spring. And if you don't grow and build bees in the spring, you can't grow and build bees. You can't build up bees in July and August in Texas. It's too hot. So beekeepers have a lot of beekeepers don't have money to rebuild, and there's a very short window, and yet this relief program that would help beekeepers rebuild is paused. So that's one of the big things I'm working on, and a lot of us in the industry are working on is getting these programs opened back, if at all possible, so beekeepers have time to rebuild. So if that program opens back up and beekeepers have time to rebuild, I'm not expecting an excess of bees on almonds next year like we've been seeing. I think best case scenario, we have just enough if beekeepers are able to rebuild. Are we doing splits in Texas yet? No, but we will be starting next week. So our operation is, I'm very fortunate in that, we have two different operations. One of our operations did quite well. We had higher losses than normal, but not like a lot of our friends have seen. So our numbers look good. Our bees that we use to split are super healthy. One of our other operations that we have had pretty bad losses. So it just kind of depends on the operation. But we'll start splitting next week in Texas. It's a little on the early side, by the way. The only reason I'm able to split that early is because these bees have been in California and they grow really early out there. Most people don't split in Texas until early April. Price for almond pollination next year, I don't know, but it's going to be up. So growers are going to have to pay more for bees for almond pollination. The problem is the almond industry is facing a lot of hardships right now, and the growers don't have any more cash than beekeepers do. So I think the price is going to adjust up, but I don't think it can adjust up a ton because the growers just don't have the money to pay a lot for bees right now. So I could see it going up $10 a hive, maybe 20. Um, if this were 5 years ago when almond prices were $4 a pound instead of $2 a pound like they are now, then yeah, we might have been able to get $300 a hive instead of 200 for bees. But the growers just don't have the money right now, so it can't go up that much, unfortunately. As far as self-pollinating varieties of almonds, they're coming, but it's very slow. An almond tree has a lifespan of 20 years, and the vast majority of almonds planted are not self-fertile. And then the self-fertile varieties don't produce as quality of a nut. So, you know, 40 years from now, yeah, we might have a really big problem. But I think we're pretty good for the foreseeable future. David, you said some have mentioned an 18-year cycle of hive loss. Is that a thing? So, yes and no. I've seen that a lot, an 18-year or 20-year. It seems like every 20 years something bad happens in the beekeeping industry. Yes, if you look at the past 60 years, about every 20 years, something has happened. But I'm going to say that is purely coincidence. Because if you look at what's happened, if you go back far enough, American foul brood was a thing. And then we had, nosema and tracheal mites. And then we had varroa mites. And then we had CCD the first time. Now we're seeing it again. And that's been roughly every 20 years. But some of it was a brood disease. Some of it was, a pest. Some of it has been a combination of factors. So yeah, if you go back the last 60 years, something bad has happened about every 20 years, but I don't think it's like an environmental cycle because it's just been completely different issues that don't relate to each other. So I think it's true, but coincidental. Laura, is this a continental US issue or truly nationwide? What are Hawaii and Alaska statistics? You're in Hawaii. You went into fall with 170 hives and you have 169 hives now. Um, well, Laura, we all want to move to Hawaii now. That's as if we didn't already. Um, there's so few beehives in Alaska that we don't have good statistics out of there. Um, Hawaii, I don't know. It's such a good question. I have not heard of my Hawaiian beekeeping friends with a similar collapse. I'll have to go back and look at the data. But I would venture to say Hawaii has not seen this. Um, Alaska, again, there's not enough bees to have records, and then we think Canada is seeing it, like I mentioned. So that would be very interesting, right? If the continental U.S. all saw it, but then Hawaii didn't. So good question. It's something to look at for sure. Dave, yeah, you said your friend near Toronto lost all 8 of his hives. Yeah, I mean, Canada is already a rough place to keep bees. It's not exactly great winter conditions for bees. So they've had bad losses for a number of years, but my heart really goes out to them because my friends in Canada, it's tough up there, for sure. Any word on losses in Mexico or anywhere else in the world? So, um, nothing out of Mexico. We're trying to get data out of Mexico. Data, is a little hard to come by in Mexico. The beekeeping industry in Mexico isn't particularly organized, and they don't really do a lot of surveys and keep a lot of records. So it's really hard to quantify stuff like this out of Mexico. So we're trying, but it's going to be hard to tell what's going on in Mexico. We will know in Canada pretty quickly. Robert, you said out of 25 hives, you've only lost 2 in the cold northeastern New York State. That's fantastic. And a lot of beekeepers have not lost bees. I mean, a lot of small scale beekeepers have had fantastic bees. So this is not, I'm not discouraging people from getting into beekeeping. If you're a small scale beekeeper, your honey's going to be more valuable than it's ever been before. I mean, this is a great time to continue on and get into beekeeping. We're not seeing the same effect on small scale beekeepers. So a lot of bright spots out there, but there is something going on in our greater environment that we should be concerned about. And because we're seeing losses in butterflies, we're seeing them in amphibians and reptiles, we're seeing them in bats, we're seeing them in native bees, honeybees, all the creepy crawlies are kind of in big trouble. And so kudos to all of you for sticking with beekeeping and helping turn the tide on that. But something's up, and hopefully honeybees can be part of what gets our community to pay attention to what's going on in the environment. Lynn, is there any info about how hives with vaccinated queens have done? Great question, Lynn. So there's a vaccine now that treats American foul brood, and you can buy, we sold the vaccinated queens last year. We're not selling them this year just because there wasn't enough interest, honestly. We didn't have enough people buy them to justify selling them again. But that data is being collected. So I don't have the results yet, but that data is definitely being collected too. The unfortunate thing is I don't know that the vaccinated queens were used widespread enough to really get good data on how they fared compared to the rest of the industry. But that is certainly something that is being looked at. Someone asked, will there be studies to see if winter bee population was abnormally low in lost hives? Let me think. That is something that's being looked at. Um, it's a great question. That's hard to quantify because as an industry, that data is not usually collected. And so it's something that's hard to retroactively look back at. What was the bee strength in the fall? I would say overall, there were certainly rumors and whisperings in the beekeeping community that, bees don't look so good going into fall. But then there were beekeepers that said their bees looked better going into fall and winter than they ever had, and then they still collapse in the winter. So I think one thing that we'll do as a result of this collapse is, as an industry, hopefully keep a lot better records. I mean, operationally, everybody has records, but a lot more surveys so that we can answer questions like that. All right, last question, and then we'll jump to the main meat of the program. Gary says, where would a hobbyist report a loss? You haven't had a loss yet, but you wondered. So about 2 weeks ago, there was a poll that was being circulated in the industry, and that's where I'm getting a lot of this data. Ongoing, there's not really an ongoing place to report a loss. So there's not really a mechanism for small scale beekeepers to report losses on an ongoing basis. There should be, but we're such a small niche industry that no one really has the funds to maintain that kind of a survey on an ongoing basis. But again, great idea, something that we should learn from, and maybe TBS can start something like that. Okay, I said that was the last question, but this really is the last question. But it's a good one, so I want to answer it. Joseph asks, if the government doesn't help the beekeepers with their losses, what percentage of commercial, I'm going to assume commercial or sideline beekeepers do I think would go out of business? Oh, it's a good question. It's a scary question. I would, if beekeepers don't get relief, I would I would say over the next 12 months, I would expect up to 25% of beekeeping businesses to go out of business. Um, that would be my best guess. Now, that's not based on data. That's just I've got my finger on the pulse of a couple things, and I'm kind of in the thick of trying to help figure out what's going on here and do something about it. And So based on what I'm seeing and the people I'm talking to and the number of operations that have 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 hives and conversations with them, yeah, it's not a small number. I should clarify, maybe not 25% of businesses, but I would say businesses that represent 25% of the commercially managed hives in the US might be a better way to put it. So yeah, so it's a big deal. So hopefully we can get some relief, and if so, I think we'll be in a much better position. But that goes back to soon we'll be getting out three things all of you can do to help, and to really help make sure that those beekeepers get the relief they need. So okay, well, that's the Q&A portion. As far as the collapse goes, thanks for your attention on that. Let's get into much more cheery topics. I promise we're not going to be focused on this collapse, every webinar through the rest of the year. Beekeeping is the most exciting, fun thing ever, and it's still a wonderful career and a wonderful hobby. I'm as enthused as ever about beekeeping, and you should be too. And these things are hiccups and but they also show the beauty of the industry coming together, finding solutions, and really protecting the industry. So, all right, couple quick things. If you haven't ordered bees, we do still have some bees for sale. Now, I would say as an industry, there are not nearly as many bees available as there normally are. And so if you want bees, get them reserved ASAP because they are in shorter supply. Interesting tidbit. I'm going to give a little shameless plug here. One thing we found is that our Texas 5000 breed, which we breed to be just a kind of an all-around tough bee, fared really well throughout all the collapses. So that was interesting, that they stood up very well to whatever's going on. We have, as you guys are probably aware, we have a bee warranty, so this is could be really relevant given the collapses, but we're the only company that we came up with this idea of, hey, we know beekeeping can be hard, we know losses can be discouraging. So for anybody that buys bees from us, we're going to offer a 1 year warranty. So if you lose your bees in your first year of beekeeping, we'll replace them for free. So check out that QR code if you want and go to our website and read more about it. But if you have bought bees from us, or if you're going to buy bees from us, you can buy this warranty. And if you lose your bees, then we will replace them. All right, Sherry. So tell us a little bit about swarms.
That was interesting. I was almost glued to the screen listening to all this. We've been kind of a part of keeping up with all of the bee losses. And Blake, I can tell you as many lectures as I've listened to and videos, you got this down, man. No wonder you're getting interviewed every day. So oh, you need to do the other slide first, Blake, the one about my articles. There we go. Thank you. See how easy that is? You just, woohoo, man, that was awesome. So my monthly March topics, and I don't know about y'all, but it's spring. And I know that some of y'all are in northern states that it's kind of still cold, but right here we were going, ooh, it's cold this morning at 50. So, and it got to 70 today. So we're happy. Okay. Our bees think it's spring and we are going with that, and we can't turn back. Anyway, so March topics, week one. So that's this week. And it's already released on the website as Strengthening Our Hives, Beekeepers Rising to the Challenge. I actually wrote this with what's going on in mind, and just literally put together what I feel like just my experience has told me in things that we can do for our bees, and some of it that has been gathered from some other resources from some good, very knowledgeable beekeepers that could be helpful. And the video is about rotating and culling old comb, which is part of that article. So if you read it, then you'll find out why I tied that in there. Week two, which is next week, swarm control secrets, spot the signs and keep your bees home. Keep the bees home. We'll talk about swarms here in just a second. And then swarm signs with a video. Week three, before the split, what every beekeeper should know. And is my hive ready to split? Very good. They complement each other very, very well, those two. And week 4, end of the month, and I'm going to talk about it here in a second. Blake spoiled my surprise, but that's okay. How to Catch Swarms with Bait Hives, and Mr. James Elam wrote this article. It's a very, very good article. And my hive swarmed, what do I do video. So all of those are super great. But do you see what I've got down on that ball? Everybody look. Special announcement. Who's coming next month? Bob Benny. Bob Benny is a new friend of mine, and I've actually had several opportunities now to have great conversation in person and on the phone and through the internet. And he's a super knowledgeable beekeeper, and he's a huge YouTube star, huge, huge beekeeping YouTube star. And he's going to be a guest of ours next month on this very webinar. So you please mark your calendar and be with us next month. All right, Blake, slide that slide. All right, so I'm gonna do 2 things with this. I'm gonna do 2 things because I'm not sure that Blake's gonna be able to cover everything that we really wanted to cover this month. So I'm gonna kind of give you just a little highlight of swarms because it is, guess what? Swarm season, which makes this one over here, his name's James Elam, he starts itching. It's like, it's like, oh my gosh, there's candy in there and I've got to eat it. He loves it. He loves it. But let's just talk briefly about what that means. Swarm season. So it's warming up, whether we are all warm or not, their populations are growing. And because of that increase, they're running out of room. And that is the number one reason why hives swarm. And if anybody's out there that doesn't know what a swarm is when a colony just basically runs out of space and they want to perpetuate the species. So the old queen and about half the hive, give or take, will take off and go and make a new home somewhere else. Somewhere else could be your neighbor's soffit or in their attic, but somewhere else. And that's a swarm. And so when they run out of space, that's what they're doing, is trying to make room for more bees. So in that, so as get my words straight here. We need to think about adding boxes to singles. So as our populations are growing, think about what your box configuration is. If you are just in a single deep coming out of winter, really keep an eye out because in the South, we're having a very good spring. Decent water, decent rain, the sunshine, the forage is wonderful. All of our trees, we've got leaves actually happening. Elm, ash, maple, all are super resources. Our bees are doing well and growing fast on this very early time in March. So you've got to be prepared to put a box on if it's a single. If you are already a double, you're going to need to think about making your splits. But just like Blake said, so in the current commercial industry, they have a little bit of a hedge over those of us that are smaller scale because they can go with queen cells. Well, we're dependent on mated queens. And what do we need to have mated queens? We need prolific drones. And drones really just started. I've got friends in the little further west of us, Central Texas, they're not even seeing, maybe 2 or 3 drones right now. So we don't have that drone population. So a split with no queen is not ideal right now. So if that's not in your cards and you see yourself expanding to the point where you can't do anything about it, you can't get a queen and nature can't really provide you with one, there's a couple of things that I'm going to suggest. One is you can put a 3rd box on there. Now, this is before swarm indicators. I'll tell you about that in just a second. You can put a 3rd box on there, but it's just going to buy you some time. If you do that, maybe you've got some with drawn comb, which would be ideal. If not, feed, but we all really are feeding right now anyway because we don't have nectar sources going. But 3rd box is a good put it off. The other thing that's a good put off swarms is to equalize your bee yard. And y'all, how many times have I written an article about that? And you can find plenty on our blog, on our TBS monthly page. So you can just kind of rob from over here and put over here. If you've got a weaker hive on this side and this one's just busting, then take one from hive A and give it to hive C if you can, but equalize everything. A lot of times you can do that. Pull frames out that are just taking up space, like fully drawn honeycomb that they never even get to in slots 9 or 1 or 10 or 1, whatever you're running. And leave space. Put some empties in the outside and give them space. So if you've got more questions about that, go to our website and in the search bar, just put in swarm control, and I promise you'll find some answers. I promise you'll find some answers. All right, real quick, some indicators before I jump on this. Typically running out of space. I think I said that right. They could be backfilling, but that's really only if you're feeding super heavy and they are really that constrained. Odds are that's not going to happen yet, but a little later in spring, it very definitely could. The obvious signs are queen cells. Now, if you have a queen cells start cropping up, just like Blake said earlier, is to be able to pull those cells off and be done with them and prevent the swarm or add in a box, that's really not going to help. I'm not sure. If I were James Elam, I'd say I'd probably just make a split, take the ones with the swarm cells and put them all to the side and in their own little box and say, okay, fine, do what you want to do. Even move it across the yard or across the pasture, whatever. And just, even though it's really too early, make them do it. If they think that they're ready to go, then okay, fine, we'll just split you. Even though it's not really time. So that's really that's just an overview. And Blake may be able to go into more detail with that as far as I'm gonna go with it right now. So I wanted to talk about this because this is his, like I said, makes him itch like he's got a problem, right? He's got a he's got a befliction. He's got a befliction. How to catch swarms with bait hives. So that is James Elam there when he used one, I call it a peat pot. We just call them swarm traps to catch swarms. And this one went a little bit too long. So points to make in this article, go and read the article at the end of the month, 4th week of the month. Choose your bait box. You've got your options between just a regular standard Langstroth hive box or a nuke box or, even what else did I put on here? Yeah, that or a swarm trap. That swarm trap that's right there. Placement location. The key on this is that it not be more than 12 feet off the ground, but 6 feet is better. In his article, he talks about that because guess what? We're not getting taller and we're not tall folks here, okay? And 6 foot happens to work perfectly for a 6 foot ladder. So when it's done, if it's a full size box, he can just slide that ladder right up underneath it, disconnect it from the tree and very carefully take it off. Works beautifully. Setting up your bait hive, that's going to be more, he talks more about that. And I know he's just sitting right here, but I can talk about him. Y'all just don't tell him I'm talking about him. Setting up, make sure it's level. Make sure it's level. Having old brood comb is a huge advantage. You know, all that brood comb that you've got in your freezer that either your husband or your wife doesn't know about. Now you've got a place to put it. That's perfect. Use Swarm Lure. I can't say enough about Swarm Commander. And I know there's other brands out there and we even sell other brands. So don't tell Blake that I said that. Swarm Commander is the best. It is an excellent product and it will, to me and to our experience, it will outrun lemongrass all day long. Also, another things that we do and done many times is we drizzle beeswax inside that swarm trap. It really makes a big difference. And if you got some propolis, you can put some in there. Anything to draw them in. You want that apartment to be more enticing than the other ones, right? Rebait the hive about once a week. Check the bait hives for inhabitants every 10 to 14 days. If it's where you can see it, you'll know. But if you've got to drive out to it, do so every week and a half to 2 weeks. Once they've moved in, it is super important to not mess with it until you see them bringing pollen in. Because what does that mean? I can hear somebody say that means there's babies being raised. That's exactly right. So if there's pollen coming in, there's a queen in there and she's laying and they need to bring pollen to feed babies. That is when you can take the hive apart, just like James is doing in these pictures. And you can tell he left this one a little bit long. You can see in that one picture there, it was full. But I think that he was just waiting to see how big it would get, wasn't he? And it got big, but it ended up being a great hive. But don't wait too long. It says that in his article. And the last tip I'm gonna say is, believe it or not, there is actually somebody got paid to research that swarms tend to happen on sunny days between 10 a.m. and 2, between 10 and 2. Take that for what it's worth. And once you've got a hot spot that takes swarms, that gets good swarms brought in, don't let it go cold. Don't let it go cold. Takeaway, you can't catch swarms if you don't put out a trap. Now that's worth $1 million right there. If you catch a swarm, keep that spot baited throughout swarm season. I just said that. All right, y'all. That's all I've got. Blake, I hope that wasn't too, oh, listen, my biggest fan. All right, I'm
No, that
done.
was fantastic. Thank you, Sherry. And thanks for covering swarms because, yes, I was not going to have time to get to that. So, okay, so let's talk a little bit about what else we should be focusing on with our bees. I'm going to kind of skip through the California update because I really want to get to the practical, what do you need to be doing right now? But this is California. The almond trees are blooming. It's beautiful. There's a summary. That looks like snow. That's just almond petals. So that's kind of what it looks like right now as all of the petals are falling off of the trees. And it's absolutely gorgeous. We're also getting nooks ready. So we're getting all of our nook boxes built and our crews are getting them ready to start installing bees here in the next week or so as we get ready to build bees for hopefully all of you guys. So we are introducing a new segment. This was Sherry's idea, so I'm going to either give her all the credit or blame her, depending on how this goes. For that was a
Okay,
great
Blake,
idea.
you can blame me, but I got to tell you something.
Okay,
Your
what's that?
audio is cutting out.
Oh, my audio is cutting out.
It's kind of, now listen, it's like, can you hear me now? It's doing
I can
okay
hear you
right
now.
now.
Okay, hang on.
Okay.
Okay, how's that, Sherry? Can you hear
It's
me?
better. Yes, it's better.
Okay. For some reason, sometimes when I have earbuds on, the audio is just wonky. So, um, okay, so this new segment, this is where people throughout the month, you guys can send pictures in, and then I will show the pictures during the monthly Buzz webinar and answer what's going on in that picture. So if you see something confusing, if you see something concerning, snap a picture of it and send it in to info@thebeesupply.com, and then we'll put it on the webinar and do some Q&A, and I'll try to answer what on earth is going on. Now, so the challenge is you try to stump me, try to send in something that I can't answer. Probably will be super easy. In fact, the very first picture we got in to stump me was this one. And I will say, this is a pest that I have never seen in bees before. So completely stumped. This came, of course, from our friend over at Texas Friendly Beekeepers, Stan Gore, the inventor of the famous Stan's soft sugar bricks. And so he sent in this picture, and it's a new pest that if this really starts spreading, then bye guys, I am out of beekeeping. But fortunately, I think it's only been seen in Stan's hives. So hopefully you won't see this coming over to your hives anytime soon. Okay, so the next picture we got was a question, really good question. Can this equipment be used? So if somebody gave you some used beekeeping equipment, maybe you've got equipment that wax mall's damaged a lot, what can you reuse once it's in this state? So a couple things here. Boxes, pallets, and boxes, bottom boards, and lids, absolutely. Scrape off the debris, you're good to go. So, unless a bottom board, lid, or box is just so rotted that you can't use it, you can always reuse them. The frames are another story. So if it were me, I would throw these frames away and just go buy new frames. I mean, frames aren't that expensive. The amount of time and effort it would take you to fix frames that look like this, you're better off just throwing it away and starting over. Now, if I was going to fix them, here's what I would do. I would scrape all the wax off.
And then I would use a pressure washer and then make sure that I got those cells completely clean. So all the debris popped out of those cells. And then I would recoat them with fresh beeswax, 24 hours before I was going to put them on a beehive. And you want fresh wax because old wax tends to collect dust and it loses its smell and bees won't work it. So you want really fresh wax when you're recoating frames. So if you really wanted to save it, that's what I would do. Personally, I'd toss it and start over. But the boxes, lids, bottom boards, 100%. Just scrape them clean and you're ready to roll. Feeding bananas to bees. This is a common one. I agree with the pictures here. The best bananas to feed to bees are ones that are on the older side, not the really fresh side. There's a couple interesting studies out there that are very small studies that show that bananas might help reduce or control chalk brood. And then they may also uh, provide some nutrients to bees that are helpful to bees. I will say, super anecdotally, in my experience, I have seen bananas control chalk brood. So I've had a bee yard that had a bunch of chalk brood in it. I gave half of the bee yard bananas. I didn't give it to the other half. The half that had bananas, the chalk brood was completely cleared up. The half that didn't get the banana still had chalk brood. So in my experience, it does something, but that's anecdotal, to be clear. But I certainly don't think you're ever going to hurt a beehive by feeding it bananas. So it's kind of fun too. I mean, it's amazing how fast they eat these. Very quick, very, very, very quick. Can anyone tell me what's going on with this frame? Why does it have peaks and valleys, large drawn out comb areas? Does it make sense? So yeah, so this is a classic picture of a drone layer. So this is a hive where the worker bees have begun laying eggs. So it went queenless. They were not able to successfully raise a new queen. And they began to raise their own cells. So they started laying drones, and then the drones were too big for the tiny little cells, and so the bees had to like expand the cells to hold the drone. So yeah, it's a classic picture of a drone laying hive, and once it gets to this point, it's in my experience really not worth trying to save. So you just kind of shake the bees out and store the equipment and start over next year. How much is too much drone brood? And is it okay for drone brood to be mixed with the worker brood? So these are really good pictures. So the picture on the left, perfectly normal. The bees are going to put drone brood kind of together in one area. And they're going to that's very, very normal. So about 10% of the brood in a hive is drone brood, and then the rest is going to be worker bee brood. So seeing areas of drone brood like we see on the left, totally normal and acceptable. The picture on the right isn't is a little concerning, where you're seeing where you're seeing quite a bit of drone brood mixed in with the worker bee brood. Now, if I just saw this on one frame and all the other frames looked okay, and a couple weeks later everything looked normal, probably okay. If I'm seeing this throughout the hive, it's a good indicator that the queen is failing and it's time to replace the queen. She's running out of sperm and she's laying unfertilized eggs intermixed with the worker bee brood. So if I saw that intermixed throughout all the brood and saw it for a couple weeks, I'd be requeening that hive. Do these queen cells mean that my hive is requeening themselves, or are they swarm cells? Can I just scrape them off and keep the hive from swarming? Either way, do I leave them or scrape them off? Great question. So the bees that read the beginning beekeeping books should put the swarm cells along the bottoms of the frames. Not all the bees read the books. So if there are, I have certainly seen hives that swarm and the cells are not located along the bottom of the frame. So here's what I'm going to do. If I see eggs and larvae in the hive and the brood doesn't look super healthy and the hive is kind of weak, those are them trying to requeen themselves. I would either let them or I would wipe out the cells and requeen the hive myself. If the hive is super strong, great healthy hive, packed full of bees, and I see eggs and I see those swarm cells or those cells, they're swarm cells. So I kind of judge it almost more on what's the strength of the hive. If it's a kind of a weak hive, but got plenty of room, and you see cells, they're trying to requeen. If it's a super strong hive that's packed to the brim with bees, they're trying to swarm. In my experience, you can't just scrape the cells off to prevent a hive from swarming because you probably will miss a cell and they're going to swarm anyway. I've seen hives swarm that you did scrape all the cells and the hive still swarmed. They're like, well, good luck, bees. I hope you find a way to raise new cells. We're out of here. So it's not a very reliable method to prevent swarming, just scraping off cells. The only way, once I see cells, the only way I really know to prevent swarms is by splitting that hive. So you split that hive 2 or 3 ways, and that really shuts down the swarm impulse. But that's the only way I've seen. One thing you want to be careful of before you split up a hive that has swarm cells, a hive typically swarms about the time the cells are capped. So if you're already seeing capped cells in your hive, there's a good chance they've already swarmed. So before I split it up, I'm going to look at, what's my bee population? If it's still cram packed full of bees, they probably haven't swarmed. If I see eggs or if I see the queen, they haven't swarmed. But if the bee population isn't like great, if it's just like, okay, it's a good healthy hive, but it's not packed full of bees, and I don't see fresh eggs, they probably already swarmed. And in that case, I'm just going to let them hatch those queen cells to replace the queen that swarmed away. Okay, this is the last one. This hive is less than a year old and I believe has been doing very well. I will be doing a mite treatment here in the next day or so. From the pictures, anything I should do? How does this hive look? So great question. I am going to say that this hive looks okay for this time of year. You know, it doesn't look super strong, but this is kind of the weakest that bees get. The picture on the upper right is just dead bees on the bottom board. I do see some larvae and pupa in the dead bees and the bottom board there. And then the brood does look a little bit patchy. And I don't see a lot of stored nectar in the frames. Now it's just one frame, so it's a little hard to tell. I do see some food stores on the picture on the right, but there's 2 things that I would do to this hive just based on what I'm seeing. Number one, I would absolutely do a mite treatment, which is what you're already thinking about doing. So I do see some potential signs that this hive has a mite issue. The pupa and larva on the bottom board are an indicator. And then the brood's a little spotty, and I do see some uncapped cells of brood. Again, could be an indicator they've got a mite problem. I would also feed them some 1-to-1 sugar syrup because I'm not seeing a lot of stores, and that could also cause them to pull some of those pupa and larvae out of the cells. So I would give them some food and I would do a mite treatment. And then if that brood doesn't improve as far as being so spotty, then they might need a new queen as well, which they probably need a new queen because it's spring. Okay, so that was fun. Thank you guys for those of you that sent questions in. If you want to get your questions answered next month, then just anytime throughout the month, send those pictures in to info@thebeesupply.com and just say, pictures for the webinar, and be more than happy to post them and see if you can stump me next time. So spring blooms, depending on where you are in the country, there's elm trees starting to bloom, dandelion starting to bloom, henbit, some willows in some parts of the country, maples in some areas. A lot of the country is seeing a very early pollen flow just getting started, which is super exciting. That's my oldest daughter who's 10 now. So she was probably 5 at the time, but I love the picture, so got to leave it in here. But some signs of spring that I look for are how many drones, is there drone brood in the hive? It's a sure sign that spring's coming when the bees start raising drones. Do I see eggs and larvae? Do I see pollen? Am I seeing increased flight? What blooms am I seeing? Daytime temps are in the 50s and 60s. Once all those things start occurring, you're in for some very rapid bee growth in your hive. So your hive is going to grow very rapidly once you start seeing those conditions. I've shown this map before, but I'm just going to put it up here again for reference. This is a map that we created. This shows the significant pollen flow start dates. Now you may see a trickle of a pollen flow outside of these dates, but these are the dates that you usually see a really significant like brood building pollen flow in those regions. This was, I've talked about these maps before. This is from the National Phenology Network. I watch these fairly closely in the spring. This just tells you how early or late your spring is compared to normal. So the darker the red, the earlier the spring is compared to normal. The blue, or the darker the blue, the later it is. So, and this is updated every single day. So this was March 5th last year. This is March 6th today, this year. Big difference. So spring in most of the country is later than it was last year so far. And now this is the leaf index. So this is plants leafing out, which is a pretty good indicator of our pollen flow. Usually pollen flow and leaf out is about the same. So we are trending in most areas a little bit on the average to late side. One thing you're going to hear about and notice if you look in the southeast, that Georgia, Florida area, look how far behind they are. A lot of package bees and queens come from Florida, Georgia. And those breeders are already pushing their package shipments back by 3 weeks. So that's very unusual. I started getting calls today and yesterday of uh, a lot of companies that sell packages saying, "Hey, do you guys have extra packages? Because all our sellers in the Southeast are 3 weeks late, which is really unusual." This is the bloom index, so this is when you start seeing a lot of blooms. And this was last year, again, very early to on time last year. Again, this year, pretty late um, uh, as far as the bloom index goes. So anyway, neat maps to keep an eye on. What does all this mean for us? My goal doesn't change. My goal this time of year is to feed as needed to maintain at least 20 pounds of stores in a hive that is at least one deep box full of bees. So I'm feeding 1-to-1 syrup because I'm wanting bees to start to grow. If you're in the northern United States, you're probably not doing much feeding yet. You're getting ready for it. It's coming pretty soon. But if you are having daytime temperatures in the 50s, and your hive does not have at least 20 pounds of stores, I'm feeding them 1-to-1 syrup. I'm using a division board feeder or a top feeder rather than an entrance feeder because entrance feeders, in my opinion, promote swarming. And so I'm going with an internal feeder. And then I'm checking 2 or 3 times through the month of March to make sure that my hives have the food that they needed. I also like to use Complete Bee. It's one of the few supplements that I recommend because most supplements are not helpful, don't do anything. But I do tend to have good results with the Complete Bee supplements. And so you can see, Complete is often used in the spring. It helps the bees grow. It helps increase the survival rate of larvae. Bee Cleanse is great in the summer or anytime during a dearth. And then Nosavit is great to prep bees for winter. So I do find these to be fairly helpful in general. If you are, and this is a little premature, we'll talk about this more in April when people are doing more splits. And we'll actually talk a lot about splits in April too. But just a heads up, if you're buying bees or making splits coming up in the next month, here are the 3 steps that you need to pay a lot of attention to if you're getting new bees. Number one, feed 1-to-1 syrup until your first box is 80% full of bees and drawn comb. At that point, you would add your second box and feed 1-to-1 syrup until that second box is 80% full of drawn comb. And then step 3, if it's still before mid-June, add a honey super and stop feeding. So little preview if you're getting bees or new to beekeeping of what you need to be focused on once you get your brand new bees home. Pollen patties, should you feed pollen patties in March? It's largely unnecessary at this point for the southern half of the United States. Still helpful if you're in the northern half. Even in the southern half, if it's not unusual that we get a cold week once the bees have started raising brood. And if you get a cold week where the bees can't get out and forage and they've got a lot of brood in the hive, it doesn't hurt to throw a pollen patty in there just to keep them from cannibalizing any of that developing brood. So again, not critical, but if you've got a cold week, helpful. And if you're in the northern half of the United States, it can still be helpful. March Varroa, I would absolutely be testing for Varroa mites in March. So a lot of hives may not need a treatment. Many hives won't have high levels of varroa mites until fall or summer, but March is a fantastic time to do a treatment. And if you're a southern beekeeper, it's kind of your last window to do a treatment before you're going to put your honey supers on in, early May. So definitely encourage you. If you're in the southern United States, you should be doing a test right now. If you're in the northern US, late March, is a good time to do a test. And I would do an alcohol wash is the most effective, accurate test method. But a sticky board is something I often recommend because a lot of people aren't going to do an alcohol wash. So it's just too much trouble and it kills your bees. And so a lot of people will slide a tray underneath the hive, sticky board tray to test for varroa mites. So, do a test. This is your window to treat. It's super important you do that test. Spotting eggs and larvae. I love talking about this. Super relevant for this time of year. If you scan that QR code, it's going to take you to a video where I talk about I'm out in the bee yard doing a video talking about how to find eggs and larvae. And so I won't get into too much detail other than to say sunlight and your smartphone are your two best friends. So holding that frame so the sunlight shines right down in the bottom of the cells, and then taking a whole bunch of pictures of varying heights above the comb with your smartphone, and then zooming up on those pictures can really help you spot eggs. This picture makes it look easy because it's black foundation with brand new white comb. Those little white eggs just stand out. That's not normal. Most of the comb in your hive is going to be dark brown, and it's going to look like this cavernous, bottomless pit trying to look down into those cells. And so you've got to get the sunlight shining in the bottom. You've got to take pictures and you've got to zoom up. Yeah, this is what it usually looks like trying to find eggs. Now, if I were going through my hive, I would actually assume that frame probably does have eggs because you see something really interesting here. You see this nectar around the edge. So the bees are bringing in fresh nectar, but see how they've intentionally left the very center of this frame open. So the center, they have left that wide open. They do that on purpose. Either it already has eggs or the queen is about to lay eggs in it. If that weren't so, the bees would have just filled the full frame. So seeing those open spaces left in the middle of a frame is a great indicator it does have eggs. But without some sunlight, and for most people, a smartphone, it's going to be hard to see down into those cells to see if there's eggs or not. So Chari did a great job of talking about swarms. I want to talk about, hives that are really crowded in March. And this is a great problem to have, but we have quite a few people reach out to us and say, hey, I can't get queens for 5, 6 more weeks. My hive's already packed full. I'm afraid it's going to swarm. What should I do? So a general rule of thumb is when a top box becomes 80% full, it's time to do something or a hive's at risk of swarming. You've got 3 options. You can split, you can add boxes, or you can equalize. Let me see. Okay, nope, I did not go over each one of those. So whoops. There we go. So let's go over those 3 options really quickly. Splitting. So the challenge with splitting this time of year is you can't get queens. Nobody's selling mated queens until usually April. So if you make a split, you can, if you've already got swarm cells in the hive, you can make a split and you can make sure each split has a swarm cell in it. So that would be my go-to if a hive already has swarm cells. If a hive does not have swarm cells, I would not make a split because you're going to be reliant on the bees raising their own queen. And this time of year, in most areas, we do not have the sufficient drone population to properly mate with those new queens. So for that reason, unless I've already got swarm cells everywhere, I am not going to do a split until I can get queens later on in April. So your 2 best options, in my opinion, is 1, add boxes. So just add a box on top or better yet, add a box on the bottom. Bees are less likely to swarm if they have extra space underneath them. So add a box at the top, add a box at the bottom. And as long as they aren't already getting ready to swarm, that should dramatically slow them down. The other option, which is a fantastic option, it's actually my favorite, is to equalize the hive. So give brood from your really strong hive to weaker hives. So if you've got a hive that's half a box full of bees, give them a frame of brood from your stronger hive. You know, you can pull 3, 4, 5 frames of brood out of your stronger hive. As long as you leave them at least one deep box full of bees and brood, you can pull and give brood for the next 6 weeks to all your other hives and boost all of them up, and it's going to help the whole apiary. So my favorite is to share that brood and help your other hives, and then it prevents your one hive from swarming. One other thing I don't have on here, I'm just going to throw it out there for the fun of it. You can get like a 5-frame Nook box and you know, put a couple frames of bees and brood in it and build a Nook and let them try to raise their own queen and see if it works. You're not risking the whole hive that way. And then if it does work, you know, you've got a Nook that you can use and an extra queen that you can use throughout the year. Um, Excess old honey on hives. So this is another issue that is common this time of year. You know, you've got a hive, they came through winter, they've got too much food. Excuse me. You've got too much food. And so they're coming out of winter with like this entire box full of honey that it's unlikely they're going to consume before it's time to start adding honey supers. So if it's a strong hive, and there's nowhere for the queen to lay because they're so full of honey still, you've got two options to get rid of, you know, old honey. If it's, you know, if it's too full of honey and the queen has nowhere to lay, or you need that box for your honey super, you can transfer the excess honey to other hungry hives. So just like we can move brood around, you can move honey around. So if you've got a hive that needs some food, give them a few frames of that honey. If all your hives have plenty of food, you can set frames of honey 20 or 30 feet away from your hives, let the bees rob out the honey, and then replace those frames. So that's easy ways to get rid of that old honey in the hive. Spring requeening. So I'm not going to go over this in great depth. I've got several videos on our YouTube channel that talk about how to requeen, how to find queens, but I want to cover it briefly. If you have not booked your queens yet for spring requeening, book them now. So please go to our website, get your queens booked because they're going to sell out quickly. Those early dates especially. I recommend proactively requeening each year, and it's not because I sell queens. We really don't sell that many queens. I mean, queen rearing and queen selling is not really a big part of our business model. I requeen all my hives every single year. The ideal time to requeen is April or May. So, you know, if it's been a year since you've requeened, you know, the last thing you want is that hive to go queenless in the middle of summer or in the middle of your honey flow when it's, you know, going to cost you your honey crop or when you can't get a queen. So April, May is the ideal time to requeen. I do really recommend requeening every single year. Now, the best time to do that is as you're making splits, and that's the way I do it. So when I'm splitting my hives, everybody gets a new queen. If you can't find the queen, you can make a split, ignore the queen, and then go back and look at your splits 3 or 4 days later. And the split that has the old queen won't have any queen cells started, and she'll have eggs. All the splits that didn't get a queen are going to have little bitty queen cells that they're starting everywhere, and there are not going to be eggs. So it's an easy way to tell. So anyway, go to our YouTube channel and look for videos, when to requeen, finding queens, how to requeen. And then I've got a video on how to find a queen when you can't find a queen that kind of goes over some tips on, hey, if you can't find the queen and you're trying to requeen, here's what to do. So right on time. We're trying to shorten these bad boys a little bit and not go full hour and a half. We're trying to go more for that hour-ish mark. Thanks for your attention. Thanks for all your fantastic questions about the collapse. Feel free to always send in your questions outside of the webinar if you want. And then don't forget to send in those pictures. So if you want to try to stump me next month, send those pictures in and we'll put them up. And hopefully you send something in that I am not able to answer. So thank you guys. Have a great March, and we'll see all of you in April.